Well, today we come to the second part of a series that we started last week, a series that we are calling No Limits. And in this series, in essence, what we are taking a look at are some purposes that God has for us as a church, as a congregation. Knowing that if we live these out well, then God will be able to do more easily some great things through us. You know, the more we can do in our community, the more we can do for one another, the more good we can do doesn't point to look at us. It points to look what God can do when we strive to really be faithful to Him and His call in our life, not just individually, but collectively. And so there's even a passage that we're looking at throughout this series, Ephesians 3. God can do immeasurably more than all we can ask and imagine. And that especially is true when we're faithful to Him, faithful to His purposes for us. And so having laid that foundation and laid down those thoughts last week, today we turn to a first purpose. These are not in any order of importance. In fact, they're not even in the same order they were when I first showed you the series, because with hurricanes and missed Sundays and all kinds of different things, here we are. But I hope they relate to a lot of what's going on in the church at that time, in that moment. Example being, when we get to No Limit Serving, we're going to have a ministry fair that week. This week, we've got some things that are just ahead, that are happening today, that relate to what we're talking about today. So, no order of importance. But this is a first purpose we're going to look at today. A first purpose God has for us is this: to help people, all people, experience authentic, healthy, biblical community. Do you know how many people in our world today think that they can pretty much become great in isolation? And it's just not possible. Even those within the church sometimes think, oh yeah, I can be a faithful disciple of Jesus Christ. I can be a strong disciple, even though I'm walking alone. Doesn't work that way, does it? I love this quote that I think speaks to that. Someone once wrote, one can acquire everything in solitude except character. So think about how that applies to us. Yeah, we can pray to God much as we want in isolation. We can learn the Bible in isolation. But boy, when it comes to taking on not just any character, but Christ-like character, we're going to need community. And not just any community, but life-giving, nurturing, authentic, biblical community. And so what we want to talk about today is this: what does authentic community look like? What does biblical community look like? And what does it require of us? To get into this, we're going to turn to Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47. Familiar words to many of you, I know, really speaks to what was at the heart of that early Christian church. It says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to anyone as he, as she had need. Authentic biblical community. Every day they gathered. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes. They ate together with glad and sincere hearts. They praised God. They enjoyed the favor of all people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Here's what we find in just those 6 verses. 4 things that are key to making a community an authentic biblical community. So let's look at those today. Here's the first. First, an authentic biblical community is always built around a very high commitment environment, or it always has within it a very high commitment environment. In Acts chapters 1 and chapter 2, the writer here talking about this earliest gathering of Jesus' followers, he uses a word over and over again to describe them. And the word he uses is the word devoted. In chapter 1, verse 14, he says, the disciples and followers devoted themselves to meeting together in the upper room for prayer. In verse 42 of today's passage, he says, they devoted themselves to the teaching and to the fellowship and to the breaking of bread together and to prayer. And then a few verses later, in verse 46 of today's passage, he writes, day by day, those in the early church, they devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple. And why does he use this word over and over? Because this word points us to the high commitment environment they were creating in that early church. Now, in our passage today, Luke breaks that down a little bit and talks about a lot of different things they committed themselves to. But there were two in particular that mattered most. First, it says they committed to coming together for worship in the temple each and every day, much like what we're doing here, even though we only gather once a week. But then it says they also intentionally, equally important, committed themselves to this, to gathering together in a smaller way, in a smaller group, on a regular basis as well. We might think of that today as a Sunday school class, as a Wednesday night class, as a small group of some kind. And what we've got to realize is this, always, they're people just like us. You know that they woke up some mornings and they thought to themselves, I don't want to go to temple today, right? Right? They did anyway. Why? Because commitment, high commitment, was at the center of their walk together. There were times they got up and they said, guys, we've gone to temple. Do we have to go to that smaller gathering too? And yet they did it anyway. Why? Because high commitment was at the center of them being an authentic biblical community. And so, of course, the question is, are we committed, really committed to those very things as well? A missionary in Africa was once asked if he really liked what he was doing. His response was shocking. Do I like this work? He said, no. My wife and I do not like dirt. We have reasonable, refined sensibilities. We do not like crawling into vile huts through goat refuse. But is a man to do nothing for Christ he does not like? God pity him if not. Liking or disliking has nothing to do with it. We have orders to go, and we go. In a very similar way, we've been given orders. Those orders are in part to create a high commitment environment here at Beamer. And so ask yourself first today, are you fully committed to worshiping God weekly? Knowing that that's a part of God's call in your life. But then also ask yourself this question as well. Are you also fully committed to gathering with others in some way beyond this time of worship? Now, in the midst of talking about especially that second commitment, for those of you that feel like, I'm regularly in worship, but I really haven't engaged a smaller group beyond this time and place, I don't want to just leave you hanging. So I want you to think about some opportunities in the midst of what we're talking about that are right before you. For example, when it comes to that commitment to something smaller beyond this time, at 12:15 today, we're going to have a gathering of people who are going to be talking about some opportunities to join either existing small groups here at Beamer that meet in homes throughout the week, or perhaps as people come together, new groups will be formed. Attending that gathering at 12:15 today might be a way for you to say, okay, Lord, I'm committed to this. I got to find ways to commit to the other. A week from Wednesday, as Morgan shared earlier, 3 classes are starting up. Wednesday night, October 11th, Jane Donaldson and her incredible crew, always welcoming people in. A variety of studies she's led over the years. That's one option, but Nancy Halfin is grabbing another option. World religions. I'm going to start a Bible study. Ours are 6 weeks. Hers is 4 weeks. But as you look at those, you might say, yeah, I want to be a part of that. It's a way for me to embrace this other commitment that I need in my life. Child care is available. You just got to let us know. Some of you look at the dinner club insert and say, you know, that's a way I can at least begin to build relationships. Doesn't have to be a Bible study. You go golfing with our golf group. You know, you find that in the bulletin today. You take a trip with our M&M's group. Other ways to build relationships, to gather in smaller ways beyond this. And then, of course, every Sunday morning, there are a couple Sunday school classes that would welcome you in with open arms. But I don't want to just throw out, commit yourself to worship, commit yourself to something smaller, because you need that to embrace authentic biblical community. I want to give you some opportunities, some options. So think about those. Secondly, authentic biblical community also has within it a common mission, a singular focus. Here's what Luke tells us in Acts 2, verse 32. All the believers were one in heart and mind. Now, when we read that, we know that that doesn't mean they all had the exact same opinion on everything, right? They weren't fighting over who should be ruler, right? Because that was kind of set in that day. But you know, they argued over a variety of things in life, except for one. As an authentic biblical community, what those words speak to is this. They were all on the same page when it came to their common mission. I hear people say from time to time, and it's fine, when looking at our common mission to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. People sometimes say to me, well, gosh, that's not really Beamer's mission. That's the overall United Methodist Church's mission. And always have a couple of responses to that, and I'll share that with you today. First, can it be both? I think it is a really, really good mission when we use it well, but then my response would also be this, thinking about using it well. It's such a beautiful mission for this reason. Because what a difference it makes in terms of our being unified when we say in the midst of each word we're about to speak, each action we're about to take, how beautiful it is and helpful it is when before we speak or act we say this, how is this going to help us make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world? Powerful. For example, it's kind of hard to get caught up in gossip. It's kind of hard to get caught up in division. You know, some churches deal with that. Thank goodness we don't. You know, it's hard to get caught up in those kinds of things. Just anything negative in general. For me, for you, to get really caught up in it and stay there. When we begin to think before each word we speak, each action we take, gosh, if I do this, if I say this, how is this going to impact our ability to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world? Man, that helps us. It helps kind of anything negative to just kind of drift away because of that singular focus. Likewise, you know, and some churches get caught up in this, and we do from time to time. It's hard for us to pit kind of ministry against ministry. You know, well, this ministry is more important than that one, whether it's budget discussions or anything else. Hard for us to get caught up in that when our thought is constantly focused on, God, you've called us to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Why is that singular focus so unifying? Because that's hard work. And when you start thinking, Lord, we want to make disciples, you realize that's going to take every single ministry we got here, working together well, supporting one another well. or even on an individual basis, it's pretty hard for us, if we keep that vision before us, that mission before us, it's pretty hard for us to say, yeah, I'm going to neglect my commitment to worship. I'm going to neglect my commitment to gather with others in a smaller way. I'm going to neglect my commitment to serve. Pretty hard for us to say those things and feel good about them when all the while we're thinking, gosh, if I don't do that, how's that going to negatively impact our ability to be the church God would have us be, to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world? Healthy, growing churches, that which we're striving to be, they're unified by a singular focus. That's what creates for them an authentic community. And so ask yourself, secondly today, how are you embracing our common mission? Or if you're hearing it even, thinking about it for a first time, how might you do that? Thirdly, authentic biblical community is also always focused on giving, a desire to give. In verses 44 and 45, it says, all the believers were together and had everything in common, selling their possessions and goods. They gave to anyone as they had need. Now let's be clear what this doesn't mean. It doesn't mean every single person in the church sold every single thing that they had and gave it all away. They would have been in trouble if that had been the case, right? Instead, what those words speak to is a complete change of attitude within that biblical community. A complete change of attitude when it came to how they looked at what they had. Their question no longer was, how can I get more? Their question now became, Lord, how can I use what I have to help those in need? Always know that the reason each fall we have a stewardship emphasis, the reason you get a letter, the reason we talk about this, rather than just saying, oh gosh, we'll be fine, because God is good, we probably will be. But the reason we talk about this is because of this example set by the early church, an example that reminds us authentic biblical community does talk about giving, does have at its center naturally just this idea of placing a high value on how we might use what we have to care for others. And then there's a final thought today. Lastly, an authentic, life-giving, nurturing biblical community, are you ready? Is always also focused not on self. An authentic biblical community is always, lastly, concerned about those who are outside the community. One of the things we see a lot of today in our world, in terms of physical communities, are gated communities, right? When it comes to a gathering of houses, a gated community, is not a bad thing. It can lead one to feel a little more safe, a little secure, whatever, right? When the church begins to become that, when the church begins to think that way, us and them, when that happens, not a good thing. Because when those outside the church are not the primary focus, and I want to say it that way, not the only focus. We already talked about how we need to care for one another within the body as well. But when those outside the church are not the primary focus, then however well we know our mission, we're not going to be able to fulfill it. In verse 47, Luke says this about the church in Jerusalem. Every day they enjoyed the favor of all the people, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. A great word here is the word favor. Because when he says they enjoyed the favor of all people, he's not saying that early Christian community had no critics. My goodness, they had great critics. He's just saying because of who they were, because of how they lived out life as an authentic biblical community that opened its arms to all, because of that, most of those around them in the world looked at them positively. In fact, many of them wanted to do what? They wanted to join them. Which leads us to a final question for us as a church. Do we enjoy the favor of people around us? Winter Haven, Auburndale, Dundee, Haines City, Bartow, Lake Alfred, Lake Ashton, Lake Wales, Lakeland. Did I hit all the lakes? I hope, all around us, do we enjoy the favor of all people? Do you know how much harder it is to do that today? In the 50s, man, you could not walk down the street and probably find someone who didn't go to church, right? If you're walking down the street in Winter Haven. Today, not easy to enjoy the favor of the people around us. And so it's a great question. Do we enjoy the favor of all? And how can we measure that? Same way the early church did. Are people outside these walls wanting to join us in this mission? The answer, some are. I think more than most churches. But God can do immeasurably more through us when it comes to reaching those outside these walls. If we strive and strive and strive, not just to work harder at creating an authentic, nurturing, life-giving biblical community, but if we make sure we create that community for all, invite them in. Remember where we started. One can acquire everything in solitude except character. As we strive to take on Christ-like character, therefore, we're going to need community, and not just any community, but authentic, biblical community. So ask yourself as we close this time together and begin to prepare our hearts for communion, ask yourself two questions. One, are you personally engaging authentic biblical community through your commitment to worship, through your commitment to some kind of smaller gathering? Are you personally engaging the biblical authentic community you need for your own sake? But also equally important, by your commitment to our mission, by your commitment to those outside these walls, are you also doing everything you can to help us be an authentic biblical community that is reaching out to others, giving them a place to find a walk with Christ, new life in Him?